So much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tyagi. Am I audible?
Yeah, ma'am, you are audible.
Yeah. So thank you for the good words which you have spoken about me. And first of all, I would like to thank the organizers, particularly my beloved Dr. Pallavi. I used to say her Pallavi because we are in association for less than 22 years. So this is a very good opportunity to me also to share my views on a very relevant topic, that is constitutional law, which is contemporary, relevant for all the times to come and all the times which we have seen during this 70 years of its enforcement. Whenever I used to go to the classes, in the constitutional law particularly, then I always ask my students that come with the bare act of the constitutional law, and that is your Gita, Bible, Quran, Guru Granth Sahib, whatever you say, that is the Constitution of India for a law student. Now, as I have been told that this is a faculty development program, and in that faculty development program, I can understand that the faculty members would be there, but because it is also open for the research scholars, so it is good that my way of, we can say, delivery would have been a little different, because both the, we can say, the students as well as the teachers, both are here. So in that scenario, as the topic has been allotted to me, that is the techniques of the constitutional law teaching and the emerging issues. So I think that let us break this topic in two parts. First, that is the technique of teaching, and the second is that of the emerging issues. Now, so far as the techniques of teaching and particularly constitutional law is concerned, then first thing which everybody must know, that there is no such big difference between the teaching of a constitutional law or the other laws. The law teaching remains the same, but we have to do some extra effort while teaching the constitutional law. So the very first thing which comes to my mind is that, and which I am also observing for the last 29 or 28 years of my teaching career, that teaching, or the persons who are coming in this profession, whether they are coming in this profession by choice or by default, because it is after seventh, we can say, pay commission, that now the good teachers are also joining this teaching fraternity. Otherwise, earlier we have seen that only few good teachers could come to this profession, and the rest of the, we can say, the law teachers or the law students, they used to go to the judiciary or other services because they find that this is good. But I must tell you that day before yesterday, when I received one phone call from my student, and he was also some 20 years back batch, some 2000 batch, and he is presently a DJ, district judge in some of the district in Jharkhand. So he was saying that I'm not enjoying this job. Judiciary, I'm not enjoying. If I would have been there in the education or academics, that would be very good for me. And now he is to move to the High Court also very recently, but still he is not happy with that. And he is not the only case, he is not the only example. There are so many other students also who are doing jobs in some other, we can say, good institutions. They are also wanting or wishing to come back to the academic. So academic is to be by choice. It should not be by default. If you have academics by choice, then only that passion will be with you to be with the students every time. Because when you go to the class and when you take the class, then you come out from the class, then you find that really it's a good thing, and you will be satisfied, more than satisfied, when there will be a good class. So teaching must always be a passion for the teacher. It should not be by the way. It should not be that you have not properly prepared yourself and then you are going to perform or to present in the class. That should not be a teacher's quality. So keep in mind, because all of you may be a budding teachers, or you are coming in the field of the teaching, because research scholars are also there. So they may also be, aiming for coming in this law education or in this law field. So first of all, we must know as to what is the aim of this law education, or how you want to come in this legal field, in the academics particularly. So first of all, you must all congratulate yourself that if you got the opportunity to teach the constitutional law. I have seen that in the initial stages, in the when a teacher is appointed at the as an assistant professor, now it is said, earlier it was lecturer. So the senior teachers were not giving them to teach the constitutional law. When I joined in 1991, I was given Hindu law, company law, which I have never studied. During my LLB only I have studied. Then I was given this legal history to teach. So these type of the subjects will be given to the new teachers. And when this constitutional law is given to a teacher, then naturally it is very, very challenging. It is very, very exciting. And one must congratulate that he has been given this opportunity to teach none other than the Suprema Lex. As we all know that the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and the very distinguished point of this Suprema Lex with the other laws is that other laws are related to the person concerned. These are the laws for the people. These are the laws which provides that these are your rights. This provides that this is your duty and all these things. But this constitutional law is something which is like a contract between the individual and the state. The constitutional law is something different from the other laws, because here the state is said, or state is under obligation that the state will do or state will not do these things, and that is because of that contract which has entered into with the people of India and with that of the government. Because we have, we can say, given our right to every right to see that property is saved, our other things are saved, our dignity is maintained. And for that, what we do, we will abide by the laws of the nation, we will abide by the supreme law of the nation. And that's how these all rights which we are conferring upon you, you have the limitation to save and to protect these rights. So constitutional law is different in that aspect. Now, once we are in the teaching job, so what are those techniques with which we have to come to the classroom? So first of all, it is required that if we are going to teach, then sound knowledge is one of the very important factor which every teacher must with the information. Now, knowledge is associated with the information in the term that whatever we are going to preach, whatever we are going to deliver to the student, then that is related with the information which we have achieved from various, we can say, sources. So information is also very important and associated with your sound knowledge. So until and unless you have that knowledge, you cannot speak in the class, you cannot deliver in the class. So sound knowledge is one of the very important, we can say, tool or technique which you must have while entering into the class. Then for a law teacher, it is required that the logical argumentative skills must also be with him. And this logical argumentative skill that is associated with the appreciation or application of theories. So if you are in the law field, then you must know the why, what, where, how of everything. If you are not argumentative to that point, if your skill is not working on that line, then naturally it would be considered that you cannot be able to justify the class by speaking or by only that knowledge which you are having through various information. So for that, you need a critical thinking, you need diverse opinion also, and at the same time, you also need some professional competence. Now, this professional competence is related to the affecting of your goals, which is associated with the values, attitudes, and interest also. So attitude matters very high when you are coming in the job of a teacher and teaching a subject like constitution. Your attitude speaks everything. That values and that interest in you, that is very important, which shows your professional competence. And if this professional competence is with you, then no doubt that you will be considered a very good teacher. And for that there are certain tools, techniques, methods. And as we all know that in today's scenario we are in the this COVID-19 situation, where we are meeting online and everything has been virtually being seen by everyone. So in that scenario it is also very important that we have to be learn as to coexist with this COVID-19. And for that it is required that being we have to be this techno savvy, we have to be tech savvy, because what is new normal now, that is to be tech savvy. And for that tech savvy it is required that you must know how to operate, how to work through various platforms, how to prepare the Moodles, how to prepare for the Google Classrooms, how to join various other platforms, and how to prepare the videos of your lectures, how to relate with the students. So this is all you have to learn, because this is the situation in which also very important, because aware of relating to this COVID-19 report, relating to this UGC exam and calendar, academic calendar presented by R.C. Kohar, Professor R.C. Kohar. And in that report one of the recommendation is that during, not only during COVID but after the COVID-19 also, 20% subjects will be, or the 20% course of each subject will be taught through the online we can say method. And in that online method we have to learn with this online teaching, we have to be tech savvy. And it is also very important that technical support is not easy to get. So be self-reliant as to how to work from home and how to learn this thing. This is also one of the emerging trend in the law teaching as well as in other teachings also, though it is having some impact also, ill impact also, as we see in the students of the we can say nursery, KG, and up to class 5. Three state governments, Maharashtra, Karnataka, and Madhya Pradesh, they have also banned this online teaching for these small children. But for higher education, this is going to be a compulsory part. So we have to be very, very careful about this thing, that we have to be tech savvy. Now, next thing is that how to start with or how to begin with this learning, or how to begin with this teaching. Now, when I say that the constitutional law, so understanding or the learning style of the student is also very, very important. Now, if you are teaching the students of the first semester, if you are teaching the students of the second semester, some final year, that I mean to say that if you are teaching the students from the first semester, that is, they are very new to the system of law. Then if you teach, then naturally what you have to do is that you have to teach in such a way so that their foundation or the grounding, that is basics and concepts, would be very, very clear, because they are very receptive at that age. If you see that the semester first students, they are very receptive, and in that way you can pour various things in them, and that you cannot do in the final years students, because at that time they are not as receptive as the students of the first semester. And as a teacher of the law, you must be also aware that constitutional law is a subject which is being taught in each and every university, institute, or law college. But when it is to be taught, that it is in the first semester, second semester, third semester, final year, LLM, whatever be the class, so that is different. Some of the we can say syllabi is also different. They take sometimes they take it some portions of the constitutional law. In other institutions, some other portions would be there, but there are certain normal things which are there always. So when you are entering the class of the constitutional law, you must have in your mind, and you have to understand the style of learning of the students as to how they are to learn. And this is very important. And the second thing is that when you apply the components of the effective learning or effective teaching to the or you are instructing to the students, then always tell them that if you are writing once, then you must read that thrice. This is very important. So if you are writing something, that makes you to learn the things, but if you are reading that thing again and again, that makes it very sharp, and the student will never forget as what you have taught in the class. So writing once and reading thrice, this is one of the very important, we can say, jumla keh sakte hain, that you must tell to your students that they must apply this thing in their learning. Next thing is that teaching and learning are the two components of the education. We all know the teaching and learning are the two components of the education. We all know. And it is also said that learning, this teaching is an art while learning is a science. How come this teaching is an art? Teaching is an art because it needs your skill. Teaching is an art because it needs your creativity, your constructiveness as how you are going to teach through various methods. And on what topic, which method you are applying, that is your art. And learning is a science that is on the part of the student. That is sad because learning becomes a science. They have to use their cognitive skill, they have to stimulate the things, they must know as to how to learn these things. Though learning becomes a science and teaching becomes an art, and this is also we can say very important for a teacher to understand while entering in the class. Then another thing which is important for the law teaching, and particularly the constitutional law teaching, is that relating to the contents and the context of the subject concern which you are going to teach. The topic or the subject which you are going to teach in the class, then one of the technique which you must not forget is that you must always prepare to give the lecture in a way so that the content and context may prove your teaching, may prove your lecture. For example, if I take the case of 39th Amendment to the Constitution, I don't know how many of you are from the law field, because FDP is open for all the faculty members or all the students may be there. But 39th Amendment is very important, and that too, it has become very important. And if you are having the habit of reading newspaper or this listening the news on the channels, radio or television, wherever it is, then you may also be aware of this 39th Amendment that is related to the amendment of Article 329 of the Constitution, which is related to the election. Now, when I'm going to teach the students in the class regarding the 39th Amendment or the election, then the things which I have to contextualize or conceptualize in the content is also related to that topic and subject, is the history of that thing. We have to give them the we can say foundation as to how it come. We cannot say directly that the 39th Amendment was done by the Parliament, and that by that amendment 329A has been inserted in the Constitution with 3-4 clauses, and in those clauses the election of the Prime Minister and other VVIPs have been excluded from the judicial review, and like these things. So this is not the way of teaching. We have to inform the students the context in which this 39th Amendment has been done by the Parliament. And as you may be aware of that, this 39th Amendment, that was an outcome of the we can say decision of the Allahabad High Court of 12th June 1975. Justice Jagmohan Lal Sinha when he delivered the judgment and has declared the election of the then Prime Minister, Mrs. Indira Gandhi from Raebareli, Uttar Pradesh, as null and void, unconstitutional, by using different, we can say, other means which were not to be there in the free and fair election and as the democratic nation under the Constitution of India. So the decision of the 12th June of the Allahabad High Court, which declared the election of Srimati Indira Gandhi, the then Prime Minister, that was challenged in the appeal before the Supreme Court. And that time, you know that June, that is the court is on vacation and the vacation bench was there, and Justice Krishna Iyer in vacation bench has partly stayed the decision of the Allahabad High Court, and with the restriction that she'll not be entitled to vote in the parliament. So when the vacation were to be over, the case was listed for 11th August 1975. And in between, you know that the emergency has been enforced from 25th June 1975, and which was declared by herself on 26th June at 8 o'clock in the morning news from the All India Radio. So in this context, what happened that this 39th amendment, by which the Supreme Court's entry of a judicial review, the judgment delivered by the High Court, and the election of the Prime Minister and the other VVIPs, this all has to be excluded from the judicial review. It is not to be questioned before the court of law. This amendment has been brought. And because 11th August was the date, so you all may be aware of that this 39th amendment was done only in 4 days. 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, these were the four days of the August that this amendment has been completed. And in that 4 days, you see that on 7th, the bill was introduced, amendment bill was introduced in Lok Sabha, it was passed. On 8th, it was introduced in Rajya Sabha, it got passed. On 9th, it was circulated to the states because it was an amendment which was related to the special majority with the ratification of the states also. So various states have also ratified that. And at the same time, on 10th of August, it got the assent of the President of India, that being a Sunday. And on the same date has been notified also, because 11th August was the date on which the hearing was there of the case which was in appeal before, from the Allahabad High Court. So in that scenario, if you will teach the students, or if you will tell the students the context and the context in which this particular amendment has been brought, then this would be clear as to what you want to deliver, and this becomes very, very important. But while teaching or while telling the students this context or contents, then you have to be focused. If you are not focused, then it would be very difficult for the students. I have seen, we can say, so many senior faculties also who are going to the classrooms, and in a class of 50 minutes or in a class of 45 minutes, they just go and they tell the stories or various examples on a particular topic without going into the topic, without going into the concept, without telling the students the basics about that, and they come out from the class by storytelling. And when it comes to the students during the examinations as to what to write, at that time they cannot write those stories of Iran and Turan. They have to write some content, and content is missing because the teacher is not focused. So it is very important that a teacher has to be very, very focused as to what he or she has to teach, and for that he has to give the examples also. But those examples should not be in such a way so that the teacher is diverted from one place to another place and he is not coming back to the basic concept for which he is there in the classroom, for which is there in the syllabus. Because the time today is that we are all bound by those restrictions of the syllabus, the we can say this credit and all that, and we have to teach that thing. So during that teaching, we can enhance these things, we can apply other things also. But The point is that we have to be very, very focused on what we are teaching. Only then the student can understand. Student will be understanding as to what to write in the examination, and we can also see, we can also observe that whether the student is learning or not. And this is important only because of when we are focused towards the our teaching learning. And we have seen that they have just go to the classroom and they just pass their time, and without using any method. Every time I have seen one of the teacher in one of the class during LLB in my institute only, and the teacher has to teach the advocacy skill paper. There were around 38 students in the class, and when the teacher started teaching advocacy skills and started, what do you think that what should be the skills in an advocate? Good, it's okay. Then the teacher allowed the students that yes, you tell, and you tell. Then two, three, four students, they started telling that honesty is to be there. He should be a good orator, sound knowledge, so many things about as to what are the skills in an advocate. Then the teacher has seen the time and thought that the time is still left. So he started saying that you come one by one and write on the whiteboard or the blackboard as to what should be the skills in an advocate. 45 minutes over, class is over, advocacy skill is over. But what the student could get, because there was no explanation, there is no analyzing by the teacher as to whether these are the skills of an advocate or not. You just come, write, and go back. So this is also a thing which should not be adopted by a teacher. If you are going to a class, you must properly prepare yourself. Only then you can prevent the poor performance in the class. This is very, very important. And in today's scenario, when we see that there are so many equipments, if you are not able to study, then you can hear the things. There are so many YouTube, we can say, videos. There are other things also. You can go through Pocket. You can go through the there's a PDF to voice. So if you are not having sufficient time, you can use these mechanisms. You can these gadgets, and you can use these we can say various sources through which you can have some information with you, because information is very important for sound knowledge, and without information you cannot go to the classroom for teaching. If you are not studying through various other, we can say, books, authors, or other things, then you will not be able to complete the class even. So I will be coming to that point also. So the basic thing is that if you are going to class, if you are asking to the class, if you want the class to be an interactive class, then naturally it is also required that you have to adopt the flip class mode. That means you have already circulated the material to the students, and when they are coming to the class after having a study or reading of that material, then they will be interactive, then they will be in a position to tell the things on the right path. Otherwise, they will be wandering, or they will be roaming here and there. One will say other thing, other will say other thing. So this is not the method, and you have to be very, very focused. And for that focusing, it is required that we have to adopt certain methods of teaching. And what are those methods? There are different methods. You all must be adopting, or you all must be, we can say, using those methods. But it is also very important that in any teaching, we cannot use a single method. And there are methods like cases for law teaching particularly, and there are case study methods, there are problem methods, there are, we can say, collaborative methods, there are lecture methods, interactive methods. Then we have also entered since 1990 this clinical method and Socratic method. This is also being found in various NLUs this time. This is one of the method which is being used very well in various universities also. So if we see that the study method is what, that case study method in particularly in the law field, we find that what is the purpose of the case study method? First of all, we have to make the student learn as to how they decipher the obiter and ratio descendi of the judgment. If we are giving the students a case study, and we want that you read that particular case and then tell us what is the law laid down in that particular case. So in legal language, we all know that this is something which is related to the two principles of the precedent, that is ratio and obiter. So ratio is the law, obiter is, by the way, or we can say while delivering the judgment, the objective part or the factual decision of the court, that is obiter. So what is binding, that is this ratio. So how to decipher that ratio from the obiter? This is the case study method, and for that we have to teach the students how to analyze and how to interpret that, how to reach that what is the law, then how to evolve and how to, we can say, make the points from that particular judgment, how to extract the ruling, what is the principle laid down in that particular case, and then if you have extracted that ruling from that case, then how to apply it in a new case, in the new situation. And for that, the case study is very, very important method. For example, if I give you the example of A.K. Gopalan. A.K. Gopalan is a case where we find that Article 21 was, along with Article 22 and other, it's a case related to the detention laws. So this is a case wherein Article 21 was very, very, we can say, discussed, very much discussed in this case. And finally, we find that procedure established by law does not require to be just, fair and reasonable, as it has been discussed or held in Maneka Gandhi case after 27 years. So in that case, the judges, what they understood by that Article 21 and how they interpreted that law, that has to be brought to the knowledge of the students, that this is the judgment given by the majority, this is the judgment given by the minority judgment. Majority judgment is the applicable on the new cases, other cases also, and this is the law which has been decided by a particular in a particular case by the judiciary, high court, supreme court, whatever may be. So in that case, you see that Justice Fazal Ali was in minority, other judges majority, and what Fazal Ali's minority judgment, that became to be the majority judgment. So at that time, that was not the ratio of the case, but this became the ratio later on. Similarly, there are so many cases. If you see that to how to understand, because if it is a judgment of a division bench or a full bench or even the constitutional bench of 5 judges or so, then to extract the ruling, to extract the principle on the basis of which this particular case has been decided, it becomes a little bit easier. But when there is a larger bench, and every judge is trying to write his separate judgment, then in that case, what exactly is the ratio, that becomes very, very important, and that becomes very difficult also in the case study method. So take the example of Keshwanand Bharti case. You all know that this is the case which was decided by the ever, we can say, largest bench of 13 judges, though the majority minority judgment was only a very razor thin, we can say, minority was there, 7 to 6, this was the ratio. And that too because of Justice H.R. Khanna, when he finally said the this basic structure or essential features in the constitution, and that has become the view of the majority. And you may be aware of that, this basic structure doctrine, which is applicable after this 1973 judgment of Keshwanand Bharti case, and that basic structure was exactly the judgment of Keshwanand Bharti or not. So there are still certain issues which are always popping up and cropping up, that Keshwanand Bharti has not delivered this basic structure doctrine. And as the view of the majority, that was decided only by, that was signed only by the 9 judges out of 13. All the judges have not signed. and what shall be the basic structure of the constitution. That was also the judges, they were not giving as to what shall be the basic structure. Some says something would be there, some says other things would be there. It was only illustrative. I mean to say, it was only illustrative. They have not given any comprehensive list of the basic structure, and that's why you see since 1973 till date we are adding upon on that basic structure list, so that now it is in the process of adding almost various provisions or various we can say doctrines of the in the constitution, which are said to be the basic principles of the constitution. So be it a Keshwaran Bharti case, or it may be a ADM Jabalpur case, then you may be reminded of one case, that is a TMA Pi Foundation case, which was related to the capitation fee and all these things. And that was the case decided by a larger bench, and the decision of that case could not be understood as to what exactly is the ratio of that case. And this is in the history that for the first time another case was filed to look after as to what was the ratio of that case, Islamic Academy. To see the ratio of the case of TMFI, Islamic Academy has to decide as to what was the ratio of TMFI. So in this situation, when we are having all the things on our tips, because now you see that in India, the judgments, this Keshwaran Bharti, that was said to be the 13 judges bench judgment, was only 706 or 707 pages judgment. But now we see that there are more than 1500 pages judgment, be it Navtej Singh Johar judgment or Josen Shrive. There are so many cases, privacy, this KM Puttaswamy cases. So the number of pages are increasing because we are having, or the judges are getting material. So without going into as to what has to be written or what has to be there, it is very, we can say, difficult now to come out to see as to what is the ratio decidendi or what is the obiter of that particular case. And for that, the role of teacher becomes very important as to how they shall teach the students to decipher the ratio from the obiter, so that it may be applicable to a new ruling. So this is one method which is applicable for the case study. Case study may be not confined to the constitutional law. It is related to the other laws also, which are basically, we can say, uncodified. For example, law of torts is there, and the other laws are there, and not only uncodified, but some of the other laws also, where we can say that case to case study, they have to be there. Because earlier it was in the syllabus of the law students that they give some leading cases besides the syllabus topics contents, leading cases in each paper, that you have to understand, and you have to write the facts of that case, the principles of that case, the decision, what is the minority judgment, what is the majority judgment. So those leading cases were annexed with the syllabus of each and every paper, be it the constitutional law, IPC, and torts, and TPA, whatever paper. So the case study material method, that was very much present at that time, but now I've seen that in various syllabus it is not available. So if you are in the position to give to the students this case study method, then naturally it would be very important for the students, and they will learn how to demarcate, or how to extract the case material from that we can say judgment. Then another method is the problem method. So in that problem method, what we do is that it's a hypothetical situation we can give to the students. We can change the facts of any existing case law, or minor changes in that. Then we can ask that in that change scenario, what will be the opinion of the court. For that, they have to study through the statutory material as to what are the act, what are the laws in that reference. Is there any administrative rule or regulation which is related to that problem, which you can decide? They can also see the legal documents and some legal articles on that particular point, and any other relevant material which is very important for solving that problem. So what we can do, we can use the problem method also, through which we can give a problem to the students, and by that problem we can ask them that what would be your decision. I always used to go to the class and I give a problem to the student sometimes, and I say, suppose that you are the judge, then what would be your decision? So they come out with that, because the law is there. On that basis, if there are certain articles, regulations, then administrative rules. So on that basis, whatever would be the decision, and also in today's scenario, we see that the social impact is also very important, because law is a social, we can say law that is comes from the society. It's a social contract. And that is why it is also important that the problem which is always related to the society, the result will also come from that, by perceiving, by having certain experiences. Then another method through which we can give or we can teach to the students, that is the collaborative method. And in that collaborative method, we can give the students or we can divide the students in certain groups. And the groups may be related to that heterogeneous group, because we all know that the students are coming from each corner of the country, or if not country, from various we can say districts of a particular state. So considering the heterogeneous of the student, we can give them problem, and that heterogeneous group will decide or will come out with that solution of that problem. And in that group, something which is very, very important that will come out, that because they are from the different perspective, they have different perspectives, they are coming from different backgrounds, their understanding is also different, because that expands their understanding. So in that, what would be the result? With the solution of the problem, we will also see that there would be a team spirit, which we are lagging now. So team spirit is very important, and for that we must use this collaborative method. So there would be a team spirit. They will learn in a group. At the same time, the critical thinking will also develop, and that critical thinking will be based on their reasoning, and on that basis of reasoning they will solve the problem also. They will listen to the other persons also, in the other students in the group also, and while listening to the others, they will express themselves, and while expressing, they will come into a negotiation, and by that negotiation a consensus will be built, and by that consensus building they will come out with a solution. So in that scenario, we see that this collaborative method of teaching is also very important, by dividing the students in certain groups. So don't go for the girls or on the gender basis, on the caste basis, but it should be heterogeneous. So this will avoid the other problems also. At the same time, it will enhance the capacity of the student, how they will learn and how they can solve the problem. The team spirit and the consensus building, negotiation, expression, listening, various powers of the, or we can say of the students, will also be developed in this collaborative method, which is one of the method in this teaching. Then another method is lecture method. Now in that lecture method, we all know it is used very, we can say, promptly in every institute, lecture method. In lecture method, we see that oral presentations are made, and informations and ideas are being delivered through that oral presentation. And now with this virtual class, even we cannot be able to see as to what are the expressions and whether the students are understanding or not, they are perceptive or not. Because lecture method is the method wherein if you are in the class, then you can see the students as to whether they are understanding, they are receiving what you are delivering. Because the basic purpose of a teacher is that whatever he wants to convey, whatever he or she wants to convey, that must be conveyed to the student. That is one of the very important factor for the or technique for a teacher, that you should not use the language which is not understandable by the students. You should use that language, that lucidity should be there in your language, which every student must understand. Because it is not for you to show that you know everything, or you can speak in this language, you are having some command over that language. No, that is not the purpose. The purpose is that what you want to convey, that must be conveyed to the student. Whatever be the language, that makes no difference. So it is also important, if you see that the students are not understanding the language you are speaking, you can change over your language, you can be bilingual, whatever method be opted by you, that is very important in the lecture method. And lecture method, that is the oral presentation of the information and ideas. And this is something we can say it is the synthesis of the teacher's own, we can say, reading, research, and the insight experiences. Whatever a teacher reads, whatever he researches, whatever experiences a teacher is having for during his study, or whatever interpretation he or she makes during the reading while going to that class for teaching, then the accumulation of that insight is the presentation of a teacher in the classroom, and that is said to be the lecture method. And here we see that the participation of the student is very, very low. In lecture method, the participation of the student is very low, but it should not be like that. Lecture method can be molded, lecture method can be changed, so that if you are seeing that a student is not listening to you, is not paying proper, we can say, is not considering or not concentrating on the class, then as a teacher you must know that who are the students, whether they are learning, whether they are studying, whether they are concentrating, or they are somewhere else from the classroom, they are not in the classroom, though physically they are there, but mentally they are not there. And this is only possible when there is a face-to-face lecture, and that face-to-face lecture is also very important. Then the teacher understands as to what to teach, how to teach, where to stop. Student is not concentrating, student is not understanding, if they are giving any question, then again tell them. It is not a one-way traffic. It is not a one-way traffic. Lecture mode in face-to-face study, not in virtual. Face-to-face study is also not a one-way traffic. If a student is not having or understanding, if they are having or facing certain problem, then this is the duty of the teacher, that they must tell them the things again and again, because they must teach them for the purpose of understanding of the student. So a lecture is always dependent whether a lecture of a particular teacher is missable or unmissable. Because I have seen during my class days also, as a teacher also, that we are all bound by that timetable. And in that timetable, the teacher class is scheduled. So in one teacher's class, you see all the 60, 30, whatever be the batch. The class is full of the students. If the class is at 10 o'clock, before 5 minutes, the class will be full. And they will wait for the teacher and the class will continue. And there are teachers which I see that there are hardly any students. So it depends that how is the lecture, whether it is missable, it is unmissable by the students, and as what is the quality and quantity type of the teacher, as to how the teacher teaches in the classroom. But it is not always an absolute statement. Missable and unmissable is not an absolute statement in the terms of today's scenario. Because we see that what happened, that the student reaches to the class for the purpose of many things, because now there are so many restrictions, regulations, that if you will not attend the class, 75% attendance is must, or something like that, that you will not be allowed to appear in the end semester examination. So for that purpose, they come to the class, they do whatever they want to do, they sit in the class is over, they don't know whether the class is going on or not, but they were present physically, they were not present mentally in the class, but they got the attendance because they want to appear in the end semester examination. So these are some of the few points which are there with the lecture method. And in these type of the FDPs and webinars also, what I am going through since March, because of the lockdown of 25th March. So after that, there is a floodgate for this webinars, international webinar and national webinars and FDPs and other type of the online teaching and learning process. So what we found is that if it is for 1 hour or if it is for 2 hour, you see that after 15 or 20 minutes of its opening, there will be the messages in the chat box. Where is the feedback form? Where is the feedback form? And if the feedback form is supplied by the organizers, then you see the number of the participants started reducing. So if this is the only purpose of getting the certificates and all these things, then naturally this is not the learning. And that's why I tell in the initial phase that learning is a science. If you want to learn, you have to be very, very passionate about your learning, and this is also very important. So if I say that the lecture method is one of the mode of teaching, so there are certain outcomes of that lecture modes also, because it empowers for only those students who are really listening or who are really present mentally in the class, that empowers the students and keep them focused. So if you see after the examination, when you evaluate the copies, you can know and you can understand that who were the students who were giving proper attention to your class, because the answer of those students will be in that manner as you have taught. It is not like somewhere else, or they will write the things which you have taught. That is the empowerment through the lecture method, and the student keeps very, very focused about that. And this is also very important for the purpose of lecture mode. Then it inspires also the people and it engages them, so that what shall be the outcome of the reading and how they will practice. Because now there are other methods also, like LOCF, I'll be discussing later on, where it has to be very, very focused, objective, what you want to achieve from that course. These are the things which are very important, which engages the student even in the lecture method also. So in that scenario, we see that this lecture method also provides some new insights, and how to think, how to analyze, how to motivate, how to develop new skills. For example, if the teacher is going through some PPT, then how to make that PPT and how to present that particular lecture, how to add on various things. So these are the skills which are being developed through this lecture method also, and it gives a desire to listen again and again. If the lecture is good, then the student will be there in your class again and again. As I told you earlier, that the classes which are full, the classes which are where there is hardly any student, and this depends as to the lecture, as to what type of the lecture you are delivering to the students. That is very, very important. And for that, if there are some members from the faculty members from the education background or MEd and BEd, they have also gone through the Bloom taxonomy on this lecture method, as to what is the Bloom taxonomy that was evolved by Benjamin Bloom in 1956, wherein he has made certain principles on the basis of which this lecture method can be understood by the students and how to teach. So the thing understanding or remembering the thing, that is at the first stage. Then that has to be remembered, the comprehension of that particular lecture. Then the student has to analyze the thing. Then after analyzing, he has to apply the thing, and after applying will evaluate, and finally will create. So these are certain stages of the Bloom taxonomy, which are very, very fit to this lecture method also. As I told you, that it provides new thinking process and pondering over a thing, to analyze the thing, and then to come out for its application. This is also very, very important. The next method is the interactive method, that is interactive through empirical study or empirical learning by the students, or experiential learning for the students. And we can see that the students deliver legal services in the social justice environment, the legal aid. As you all may be aware of that, Article 39A of the Constitution provides for that legal aid, free legal aid. So that can be done through the interactive method, and they can go in the legal aid camps, in the legal aid clinic. So students, they we can say come across with the real life situation, and these real life situations they have to solve through mocks, through moot court, through mock trial. They can solve the problem through case study, through group discussion, and various other methods are there. So this can be done through this interactive method, and they can play, or they can take a stand in that interactive method. For particularly, we can say in this mock trial or 39A basically. Then seminar method is also used sometimes for teaching. The students have been allotted certain topic, or they may choose their topic on the current issues of the human rights issues or some other legal issues, and on that they have to present before the teachers, or on a particular topic some more students can give their seminar, or on different topics they may give their seminar. So various we can say views and on the same topic, that may be there as a seminar method, but that is not being used very, we can say, frequently in various institutes. And then this clinical method is also important for the law students, and particularly when they are the students of the constitutional law. And it was introduced, as I told you, in 1999. So we have this free clinical method, whereby this free legal aid clinic, free legal aid cell, then this social justice and public interest litigation, visiting to the jails, and this paralegal aids, that is all come under this clinical method, through which the student learns practically as to what is happening in the society and how to go about these things. And they know that where the marriage are to be registered, where the birth and deaths are to be registered, and how to obtain the ration card, how to obtain the Aadhaar card, and so many other, we can say, services and schemes of the government, various beneficiary schemes. And they learn this through this clinical method also, through legal literacy and awareness. They can teach to others also by going through nearby villages or some nearby areas also. So that this clinical method is being adopted since 1999 in India. And a similar method is also, that is field action study, this clinical study, or we can say it as field action study also. So as I told you, that we all know law is the instrument of social control, and it is to regulate the behavior of the persons in the society. So therefore, the law and society are never or can never be divisible in the watertight compartment, watertight department. So law comes with the society, society comes with the law. Both are to run together. So this is the method of the field action study. When we see that there are the cases of the human rights violation, there are the cases of dowry deaths, there are the cases of domestic violence, as Dr. Pallavi has said also. regarding these type of the issues which are emerging up. So violation of the rights of the vulnerable groups, the domestic violence, the child rights, then all these things, weaker sections in the society. So all this can be solved, and we can say the solutions can be given by the students and the teachers simultaneously through this field action study method. Students may be sent to particular village, particular area, and they may ask the families or the members of that village area as to what is the problem, and then they may come to their teachers and they can decide, and they can bring out with a project or a writing or a report that this should be the solution. They may go there, they may help them. This can be done by the students alone, this can be done by the help or the in collaboration with some NGOs also who are working in the field. So this is one of the method also, that is field-based study or field-based problem or study method for the law teaching or constitutional law teaching. Then another method that is coming into picture since 2019, I should say, in India, though it is there abroad in various countries, we find that, and some of the private institutions in India also, and some of the NLUs, they are also following this thing, that is the LOCF, that is learning outcome based curriculum framework. So this is the scheme of the UGC, and I happen to be the member of one of the LOCF committee for preparing the course on the human rights. So the basic purpose of this learning outcome based method is that it is shifting the content based program to the outcome based model of the learning, and each student has to be a nodal, we can say, student, and on the basis of the requirement of that student, the teaching and learning process has to be started. This is a shift from the content to the, we can say, learning. So if a student is coming to a class and there is a syllabus, there is particular, we can say, subject, then before entering the class or before starting the class, the student must know as to what he will achieve, what will be is the objective, what will be the outcome of the course which he is going to have, or what will be the outcome of the degree of which he is going to achieve or he is going to gain after spending the time in this particular class, particular subject, or like this. So this objective based, or we can say outcome based method of learning is going to be very, very important, and that makes the result oriented approach also in the students. For example, if I'm going to take a class on RTI, right to information, and in that right to information the students are coming, so without knowing as to what is the purpose, what is the objective, what shall be the outcome, what the student will gain from that RTI class, why and how they will come. So they must know as to what they will learn from that particular subject. This is the learning outcome based method. And in that RTA class, if I tell the students that after going through this particular unit of that particular subject, you will learn where to go to file the RTI complaint, how to write the RTI complaint, what is the time period, and if you will not receive the information within the limited time period, then what is the remedy? This would be the outcome. Then naturally what happened, that the student will be very, very happy, and they will come to the class because it is a result oriented class, and this learning outcome based method is becoming very important for that purpose. Then finally, there is one more method which I see is that Socratic method, which is very, we can say, used in various institutions and universities also, which is basically, we can say, argumentative skill. Argumentative skill of the students is that is Socratic method, in which the student is learned to speak in public. And this Socratic method of teaching, that this relies on the asking the questions to help the students as to how what to learn and how to learn. It has been proven to be more effective than any other method, this Socratic method. So in addition, the teacher gets instant feedback from the student as to what they have understood, and this is a cooperative argumentative dialogue between the student and teacher. This is the Socratic method. This encourages the critical thinking in the student, and it draws the, we can say, ideas as to what they have to do, how they have to do. So this provides them a forum to speak, because you know that if a student who is coming to the law classes, it's always a graduation course, LLB or LLM, whatever it may be. So after doing LLB or LLM, they are aimed towards, or they are having certain goals to achieve. And those goals are related to what? Those goals are related to that they want to be in administration, they want to be judicial officer, they want to be in litigation, they want to be in academics. So wherever they will go, they have to speak. And if they have to speak, then why not to adopt this Socratic method where they can speak in public? They have the habit to speak in the public, and understanding the things, analyzing the things, applying the things by using their cognitive mind. So this is also one of the important method for teaching for the students of the constitutional law as well as the other law. The tools which we apply for the teaching, we all know there are visual tools, they are ICT, computer, then online teaching, writing exercises, and then flip class techniques wherein the material is being sent to the students through email, WhatsApp groups, Google Class, Moodle, whatever method you can use. So this flip class techniques is also very, very important. So using technology, that is becoming more important, and as one of the tools of teaching besides the we can say this our old resources like books and libraries. We are moving towards the virtual library, we are moving towards the computers and online system also, whereby we use all these things, and we see that these are some of the techniques and tools of the teaching now. Now, I have discussed so many methods with you as to what shall be the methods of teaching, but do we say that which method is good? Can we go by one method only, or what is the way out? So, as per my experience, I have seen that no method is perfect and absolute for teaching every course. It depends that what topic you are going to teach and what method you have to apply. As I have given you the example also, that if you are going through the field study, if you are going through the Socratic method, if you are going through the interactive method, then naturally you can apply the method on these methods can be applied when you are going for the legal aid services, when you are going in the society for legal problems, when there are human right violations, then you can go through these methods. But if you have to give some philosophical idea to the students as to what is the preamble to the Constitution of India, what it speaks about. So for that, this Socratic method will not be applicable. This field action method will not be applicable. The applicability will be of the lecture method. Lecture method. So in that lecture method, you can speak the philosophy as to how come this preamble, why these words have been there, 84 words of the preamble, what is the sequence of that word. This you can use in a lecture method. So various methods are to be used in various topics. For example, if I say that PPT mode is to be applied, ICT tools, and that we have the PowerPoint presentation has to be made, because I have seen that in various RTPs they have started using this PowerPoint. They are just reading it out, and somewhere I was reading that it is like singing a song. The song is coming on the screen and the teacher is singing. So if you are going to the class without making any preparation, and you are just showing them a PowerPoint presentation, and you are reading out without explaining to the student, so this is of no use. So at least you must tell the student as to what is the purpose and how the student are to be engaged in that. how the student has to concentrate on the teaching of the student through that learning teaching method. So this is very, very important, because teaching style and technique can make a difference as to the quality and quantity of the learning of the students in the classroom. And so it is very, very important for all the teachers that use that method, which is important. If you are going to teach to the students commerce clause, for example, and in that commerce clause, you can show a PowerPoint or a slide to the student for showing that, because part 13th of the Constitution that speaks about the trade, commerce, and intercourse, and article 301 to 307, these are the articles which speaks about the commerce clause in the Constitution. So when you start teaching, then the very first article 301, it starts with subject to this part, the provisions of this part, trade, commerce, and intercourse shall be free throughout the territory of India. Now, what are the subject to this, the provisions of this part? 302, 303, 304, these are the other provisions in the same part 13 of the Constitution. So when you are going through the lecture method, then to recall as to what is 301, what is in 303 A, B, and then 304 A, B, then 302, then it becomes a little difficult. So for that, you can present a slide through that PowerPoint, and you can show that these are the provisions, and in these provision, this is the main article 301. This 302 is an exception of 1301, 303 is an exception of 302, 304 is an exception of 301. So this is how you can tell the students, you can analyze the things before the student through that PowerPoint mode, which is a bit difficult, not absolutely, but bit difficult for the understanding of the students if you are going through the lecture method. So you have to decide yourself as to what style or what method you have to adopt while teaching the constitutional law, because teaching constitutional law, as I told you, is very, very exciting and challenging course. So there are several variations of the law in the curriculum, as I told, also the stage of the students, the nature and structure of the courses, the semester system, the credit system, optional paper or core paper, because now with the advent of this 1 year LLM, this constitutional law group, we are having different papers from the Constitution itself. Fundamental rights is one paper, local self-government is the another paper, directive principles is another paper. So in parts we are teaching constitutional law. So these are some of the papers are optional papers, some of the papers are the core paper. So how to teach the students and how, where to focus on that, this is a very duty, or this is one of the technique which the law teacher has to understand, particularly the constitutional law teacher has to understand. So the first thing you need to do is to determine as to how the constitutional law course fits into your curriculum at your college or at your university, whether it's a core course, it's an optional course, it's a course in the first semester, it's the course in the later semesters, and what is the structure of that. The entire constitution has to be taught, or the constitutional law has to be taught. Along with the constitutional law, other principles are to be taught. So you have to decide according to the syllabus, according the course structure of your own institution, of your own university, as to what is there in the syllabus and how you want to tell to the students that this is the constitutional law. So an important point with a special application to the constitutional law is that you need to remember from the beginning. When you come to the constitutional law, you have to learn from the very beginning as to what is the constitutional law. And for that, if you are aware of the legal history, legal and constitutional history, the Constituent Assembly debates, all these things are very important, along with the comparative constitutions of the world, in order to make understand the students as to what the particular provision speaks for, how it has been put in the constitution, and what was the purpose of the constitution makers or authors while drafting the constitution. So in that limited universe, many professors prefer to teach constitutional as a straight, we can say, subject, just based on the doctrinal method, some case study and the provision, and that's it. So this may be an idea for a limited universe if you are having limited time. But if you are teaching to the master's class in LLM, then naturally this limited province will not be, or limited universe will not be a very good method to teach to the students, and you have to enter into the concepts of the constitutional law while teaching in the constitution. So if you read the provisions of the constitutional law, you'll find it very, very attractive. And then you can relate it with the case laws. For example, if I give you the Article 21, everybody must be aware, whether a law teacher or not, or a law student or not a law student, he must be knowing as to what is Article 21. Article 21 of the Constitution, which is in the part third of the Constitution, is only an 18 words article. 18 words article. No person shall be deprived of his life and personal liberty except according to procedure established by law. But when we are teaching to the students this Article 21, then we have to look back the history of this Article 21. Why we have put this right to life and personal liberty in the Constitution. So at the same time, what type of the developments are being made with this 18-word article so as to include a number of articles within this Article 21 of right to life and liberty. So we have to start with that. Initially, you see, as I have given you the example of A.K. Gopalan, that they tried to interpret the term or the phrase procedure established by law, according to the procedure established by law. So whether this procedure established by law will be the same as the due process law of the US Constitution, or it is something different, and at that time it could not be brought in the interpretation of this procedure established by law, and that was the procedure. Whatever law has been made by the democratic parliament undemocratically, but that was the law because it is established by the law. It is a procedure which is established by the law. So the interpretation, you see, initially, the interpretation was pointed and concentrated under Article 21, that is on the procedure established by law. After that, we have seen that it has further expanded the life and personal liberty. So there are many rights which are emerging out from the right to life and personal liberty. Right to life includes right to dignity, right to life includes right to move abroad, right to life includes food, then shelter, livelihood, so many. Similarly, personal liberty includes no cuffing, no handcuffing, nothing like that, and you can do this thing, that thing. So various things have been coming with the interpretation of personal liberty. Now, when we see that the judiciary has not stopped with the interpreting or expanding or to reading into this life and personal liberty, so many rights, they have clinged together. And this Puttaswamy case, you see that they have said that this right to privacy is both right to life as well as personal liberty. Again, they have not stopped there and they have moved further to interpret another word in Article 21, that is person. No person shall be deprived. So person, everybody would say that a person is a human being who is natural born person, that is a person. And this right to life and liberty is available to that person. But no, some of the high courts, Uttarakhand High Court and Punjab and Haryana High Court have moved further by interpreting this person to include the trees, rivers, animals, birds within this person also. So this is the thing that under constitutional law, which I would like to emphasize, is that it is very attractive law. It is very challenging law, but you have to understand as to where to start, what to start, and where to analyze the things, and only then you can come at with a concise fashion that there is no enough time to teach the constitutional law, no matter how many credits are allocated, but you integrate the perspective which you want to give to your students in the constitutional law class, because this is considered to be the backbone of the law. So when the case is on you of the preparations of chapters and lectures on the constitutional law, then do some reading. When I say reading, then I meant books, I meant articles, I meant cases, history. So bring yourself up to the speed of this constitutional law and relate the things with the new emerging things also, like COVID-19. You can correlate, as Dr. Pallavi initiated in her introductory lecture, that so many things are coming up: the right to move, right to migrants' rights, vulnerable groups' rights, the violation, emergency, lockdown, so many things. So you try to correlate this thing with the constitutional law. Where is the law? What is the law? How it has to meet up with the situation? And you can start with the short books also. You can start with the any constitutional law book for an overview, that this is the overview of a particular topic, and you can read that book. I'm not going to say that you read a book of very high end. It is important that you read a book of the authority on the law, as in India we see Sirvai, the Kashyap, the Didi Basu, and so many other names, Singhvi, Hidayatullah. So many authors, they have written Indian constitutional law. So now you start with any book which you understand properly, and for that at least you have the concept of that particular area on which you want to deliver your lecture, and then come out from that book with some other books. So it means that high level books or high end books are important. You cannot skip those books, you cannot skip those things from your study. Well, when you are a law teacher, particularly a constitutional law teacher, you read all these books. But here I would like to mention that some of the professors, they may be saying that this book is not up to the mark, the writer is not known, this is not a good book. So it depends. Every book is a masterpiece. It depends who reads and how it is read. So it is up to you that from which book you receive what. Everything, every paper which you study, which you read, that will give you something which you never know, which you are not knowing earlier. So learning is a process, learning is a science, as I'm again telling you. So by that learning, you can understand the things that every book you read, that is a masterpiece. It depends who reads and how it is read. This is very important. It is not always that a particular authority, I am not going to take the name of those authorities now, because it is open air. So that these authorities are there, so they have their own insight in writing those things. And every writer, every author who writes something, naturally he writes on the basis of his understanding. So you have a collective understanding of various authors, various writers, and then you read to all the things, and that is important for you for preparing your lecture. I will give you one of the example, is that of one of my in the starting career of this teaching, one more student who was also appointed on ad hoc basis to teach the LLM students. I was appointed and on regular basis, and one of my we can say classmate was also appointed to teach on the ad hoc basis. And he was given the paper of the constitutional law to teach at that early, we can say, stage. And I, being a regular teacher, I was given the paper of this, as I told you, legal history and something like that paper, thoughts and these papers. So there were the classes of 100 minutes, 100-minute class for a teacher to teach a subject. So when I teach the law of torts, it's a very exciting subject, law of torts. There are so many problems. The students asked the questions, and there were so many queries, and I replied those queries. I start taking classes every time. And my classmate, who was also to teach constitution for 100 minutes, he come out from the class after 20 minutes or 25 minutes. So he asked me that how do you manage the class for 100 minutes or even after 100 minutes? And the students are there in the class, they are not coming out from the class, and my class is over within 20 minutes or 25 minutes. Whatever I study, I just give to the students, and there is no more than even half an hour I cannot take the class. So I asked him, which book you are studying? He gave the name of one of the book that I am studying from this book. So I told him, that for law of torts, I am studying more than 6, 7 writers at a time. And I am also suggesting you all that if you are going to teach, then at least have the look of those writers who have written something on that particular topic, whether it's an article, it's a book form or something other. Then at least 7, 8 views points must be with you. And if you have all these viewpoints, only then you will be able to tackle the class for the time which is scheduled for that particular subject. And that increases your vocabulary also, that opens your vista, that gives you various other, we can say, sides of thinking and various other points in which you can give to the students that knowledge which you are having, which you have collected through various informations, and that is very important. So I told him that you just not come by having only one book reading, you come with more than 4, 5 books having reading on that particular topic only. If you have to teach preamble, you read preamble from minimum 7, 8 books, though it will take time in the initial phases, but that will be there in your mind, and that will be, we can say, something gift for you which you will never forget. That is very important, because nowadays what we are witnessing is that there is a lack on the part of the students as well as on the new teachers also. I'm not I mean, not giving this thing for their for anything which should be understood as something else, but it is only just my we can say suggestion, just an advice, that if at the initial stage you study we can say various things, that will be your asset forever. Because when I started the career, I was told from one of the very senior professor that initial 10 years of this service will be the foundation for your entire career. If you will learn during these 10 years hardly, you will do hard work, that hard work will pay forever. And that I did. I take that thing, and the vice chancellor who appointed us, 13 teachers were appointed in different disciplines in that university. Then after joining of all the 13 teachers in different disciplines, management, law, education, plant science, animal science, various other disciplines, 13 teachers. So he said that I have appointed you all without any approach on your capacity, but I need one thing from you, being a teacher of the university, that if the student asks you any question, then you solve the problem, you give the answer then and there. Don't wait that I will give the answer tomorrow. So that made such point in my mind that for that I have to study a lot. I have to study a lot. And that study period, that initial period of my career, that was a blessing, that was a boon for me, that I studied. I have to teach only torts and legal history, but the students come to my chamber to ask what is the constitution, what is the jurisprudence, what are the interpretation, company law, contract, whatever, UPJD, whatever. And I never say that I don't know. I give them answer then and there. This is because I did hard work. So I suggest all of you that if you want to do something, if you have some passion, if you are not by default in this profession, if you are by choice in this profession, then do hard work at this stage. This will pay you forever. This will pay you forever. So reading more and more books will also give you a sense as to how to make the more complex topics, and that more complex topics can be boiled down to the students' learning. If you are not understanding the readings of Professor Upendra Bakshi or Justice Krishna Iyer, it happens with all. We are not born English. We are learning English. So if you see that these writings you are not able to understand, then read that from some other books also. And reading from different books will be very important, that will boil down that very hard topic in such a way that it would be very we can say easy for you to understand, and you can make learn the students in that basis. Then if we see that constitutional law teaching, there are various provisions, as we all know, that in the constitution is 22 parts, then 395 articles, and though there are certain misnomers also, that the parts have been increased and the articles have been increased from 395, 448, 450. But you see that, yes, articles have been inserted, added by various amendments. Articles have been repealed and deleted also by various amendments. At the same time, the parts of the constitutions have also been deleted and added. But the final part is only 22, and the articles are 395. We don't have article 396. We have a series of articles on 243, 243 ABCD to ZT, but we have not increased the number 395 to 396. So we have article 395 in the constitution. It has been divided into 22 parts of the constitution. Now the question is that what are the contents in the constitution which cannot be avoided while teaching, or irreducible contents, that what constitution matters. Then we have to see from the very beginning, constitution preamble. Now, one of the jurists has said about Indian preamble is that preamble is the whole constitution and other provisions are just the footnotes. Preamble is the constitution and the other provisions of the constitution are the footnotes of the preamble. Preamble, as you know, that is said to be, or the literal meaning is that which comes first. But in our constitution, we find that the constitution preamble is not that which is a literal meaning of the preamble. Preamble is, in our constitution, has come afterwards. The provisions in the other parts have been drafted and made and finalized, then preamble came. Though from 9th December 1946, we started, Constituent Assembly started its working through various committees, and the drafting committee of the 7 members, the chairman, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, working on the constitution. But on 13th December 1946, Dr. Nehruji has presented this objective resolution on the basis of which this constitution has to be drafted and constitution has to be framed for the free India. So preamble is something that is in our constitution was not that run first, that is coming afterwards. As we see in the American constitution, first they have drafted their preamble. So it happens with all the constitutions, first the preamble and after that the provision. But in our case, preamble is the gist, preamble is the substance of the entire provisions that has been made afterwards. And that's why the statement of that judge that the preamble is the constitution and the other provisions are the footnote is very, very, we can say, correct, because we find that everything is mentioned in our preamble. Everything is mentioned in the preamble. So in that situation, what we find is that there are 22 parts. Preamble is not coming under part. Part 1 starts with the union territory, then citizenship. Then important thing is that some of the parts which we find that not important, but in the emerging situation, they become very important. So in various institutes, various universities, we don't find that citizenship, that is part 2, is being taught to the students as a course under the constitution. And now with this CAA amendment, I'm just taking one. Hello. So so this citizenship part 2 becomes very important with reference to the latest amendment in the Citizenship Act of 1955. And then part 3rd of the constitution, part 3rd, that is very important because, as I told you, the other laws are for the persons, and this constitutional law is for the state. This is a contract between the state and the people. And the state, that state has to protect the rights, state has to work for the people of the country. And that's why the preamble starts with, we the people of India having solemnly resolved to constitute India. So what we have done, the constitution has done, that constitution has constituted India into a sovereign, secular, socialist, democratic republic, and to secure to all its citizens what? Justice, liberty, equality, and to promote fraternity. We see that what has to be secured? Justice, liberty, and equality. But fraternity is not to be secured. Fraternity is to be promoting fraternity, assuring the dignity of the man for the unity and integrity of the nation, not of India, nation. So the words which are there, those words are very, very important, though by 42nd Amendment, some 3, 4 words, 4 I would say, because and is also there. So otherwise it is 3 words, socialist, secularism, and integrity. But if we see and is also there. So these are the minor things which you may remember. So the question is that presently we have 12 schedules in the constitution. Initially it was only 8 schedules. Later on, by the very first amendment, we have introduced in the constitution 9th schedule, then 10th, 11th, and 12th schedules are also there. So constitution is something which constitutes the country. The constitution, as we find, and the answer you will find in the preamble itself. We, the people of India, having solemnly resolved to constitute India into. So constitution is constituting a country. For what? For governing, for the purpose of its policy, for the purpose of its quality, for the purpose of protecting the rights, for the purpose of giving the social justice, giving political justice, giving economic justice. This is what the constitution does. The constitutional law sometimes, because there is confusion various times that the Constitution of India and constitutional law of India. So dear friends, we all teach constitutional law of India and not only the Constitution of India. As I told you, Constitution of India is just the bad act which is having 22 parts, 12 schedules, and 395 articles. That is the Constitution of India. Constitutional law of India, that includes the interpretation of various provisions of the Constitution, the case law, and the other things which are coming within that Constitution. That becomes the constitutional law of India. And that's why I've started giving you the methods with the case study method and other method, because if it is to be Constitution, then you have to go through the provisions only and nothing else. But we are teaching the constitutional law of India, so we have in our mind the constitution also, because everything is written in the constitution itself. For example, if I'll give you the example of part 3rd, and part 3rd starts with article 12 of the constitution. And when we speak about the this article 12, then normally the people say that article 12 is the state. But if you see the caption, you will find that the definition, and it starts with, in this part, unless the context otherwise required for the state includes. So the definition of state is given under Article 12. And similarly, if we proceed further under Article 13, then you will find 2 phrases. One is law in force, other is force of law, having the force of law. So the provision, or I would like to say that the constitution is as important as the constitutional law is important. So first we have to understand what is the constitution. That means we have to know what are the provisions in the constitution. As I told you, Article 301 also, then Article 12. Article 12, which ends with, within the territory of India and under the control of the government of India. So every word which has been put in the constitutional provisions, that is very, very important. Every word has its different meaning. You see Article 13 clause 1 and 13 clause 2. In 13.1, the words used are to the to the extent of inconsistency, while in Article 13(2) it is written to the extent of contravention, in derogation. So these two different words have been used, and what is the purpose of using these different words? This is very important. And this gives the right, or this gives the way for the judiciary to read into, to read in, to read out, to write into various provisions. And this theory, or this technique of the Supreme Court of interpretation, of reading into, reading down, reading off, writing into, these are nothing but the provisions of the judicial activity, judicial creativity, judicial activism, through which public interest litigation has come into, we can say, existence, through which the social justice is being provided under the Constitution of India and all that. So another difference in the constitutional law teaching and Constitution of India and the other laws, is that in all laws you have seen that it starts with the short title, extent, commencement, etc. But Constitution is a reverse enactment. Part 22 of the Constitution provides for short title, commencement, extent, etc., etc. It's a reverse, because it has started from the preamble, and the very first thing, that to whom we are giving to this constitution, why for this constitution, who will govern in the constitution, what shall be the authorities in the constitution, what shall be the powers of those organs in the constitution. So you see, right from part 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 up to 22, everything is there in a very systematic manner, along with part 20 that speaks of the amendment, and that is very, very important to understand why this amendment has been there in the Constitution of India. So coming to the second part, and I'll not take much time, that is emerging issues. So as Dr. Pallavi told, that there are issues relating to the rights of the vulnerable group, the right to property is there, the various freedoms, right to expression, all these things. So I find that all the books on the constitutional law are complete with these right to property and vulnerable group rights and all these things. But to me, what I see in today's scenario, what is coming up or what is increasing in that scenario, is some of the sensitive issues, which are very, very important relating to teaching of the constitutional law. And the sensitive issues, how to teach that issues. For example, if we have to teach the reservation issues, if we have to teach the issues relating to the democratic values, if we have to make a critique on the case decisions, then the laws which are upcoming, on that basis, how to teach, what to teach, where to teach, every teacher has to think about twice before going to the class, that whether the teaching is going to be only for the academic purposes, or it is having certain satire, it is having certain other things in mind while teaching or to the students in the class, because we have a heterogeneous class in every institution, and in that heterogeneity, or in that provisions of the social justice and other things in the society, we have to be very, very, we can say, objective while teaching, that what we are teaching and how we are teaching these sensitive issues, we have to take care while teaching the law students. The second thing is, which is emerging and which is always contemporary, that is the lex scripta and lex non scripta. When we talk about the lex scripta, it means the written laws. Lex scripta, law which is written. Lex non scripta, the law which is not written or unwritten law. So this controversy or this issue is always there from the very beginning of the constitution or enforcement of the constitution, when it has come in the hands of the judiciary to interpret the constitution. So we find that the non-scripta, lex non-scripta is an emerging issue. For example, you will not find in the constitution something like the doctrine of reasonable classification, the doctrine of arbitrariness, the doctrine of basic structure, the doctrine of constitutional morality. So this is not all, but other things also. As a rule of law, we are not finding in the Constitution. The separation of power as it is understood through American Constitution, we are not finding in our Constitution, except Article 50 and Part 4th of the Constitution. So lex non-scripta is overpowering the scripta, lex scripta. This is one of the issue. So this basic structure doctrine is always being criticized. And you may read the book of T.R. Andhyarujina, who has written the untold story of the basic structure, because he was the assistant advocate with H.M. Sirvai, who was advocating from the side of the respondent in this case, in this appellant in this Keshwanan Bharti case, besides others. So he had seen everything from the first-hand experience, and that experience he has written in this book, that there was nothing like this basic structure doctrine. So we have to see that what is this lex scripta, what is that lex non scripta, and how far we can go for that lex non scripta in the constitution, which, or in a country which is said to be governed by rule of law and not by ruler's law. Rule of law, you all understood that the rule of the law. There must be a law, the supremacy would be of the law, everybody would be treated equally. And that would be the situation where we can say that we are in a country governed by rule of law. So whether it is true in today's democratic situation that we are really governed by rule of law and not by ruler's law, we are now governed by rulers, whatever is there, because this is this time when particularly during this COVID time, what we see is that the judiciary is in coma, parliament is not in session, executive is issuing orders, guidelines every day, overpowering, overlapping, we can say others guideline. So in that situation, what we have to do, whether we have to continue with these democratic values, what is this constitutional morality? I have seen one of the candidate or the participant is trying to ask me the question on the constitutional morality. So constitutional morality is something which has been differently initiated from a writer, a noted jurist, Grote, French Grote. And he used this constitutional morality for the purpose of the government actions. And by chance, he was also there in Columbia University. And in Columbia University, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar was also studying at that time. So may have come across with some of the writings of this jurist Grote, who had written something about constitutional morality. And then we find that in Indian Constitution, during the Constituent Assembly debates, this constitutional morality word was, we can say, brought by Dr. Ambedkar 3-4 times, particularly on 25th November 1948, or 4th November 1948 also. And this time they have used this for the action of the government. But we find that this action of the government is not only confined to this constitutional morality, but the courts in the recent past have started to apply this doctrine of this constitutional morality in a number of ways. Particularly, we see Justice Deepak Mishra. Whether it be Rafale case, it may be triple talaq case, it may be this Joseph Shrine case, it may be Aadhaar case, it may be this NCT case. All these cases, you find that constitutional morality has been used. And to the extent that they are saying this constitutional morality is the essence of the constitution. And as on 26 November 2019, the Honorable President of India, in his speech on the Law Day, when he said that I think that the organs of the state or the state must act in mind having this constitutional morality. They will work on the basis of the constitutional morality. So this doctrine of constitutional morality is a relatively recent addition in this judges made innovation. Innovations, as I told you, the reasonable classification, innovation as the basic structure, innovation as the arbitrariness. So this is another innovation. But if you see that whether this constitutional morality has been used earlier or earlier also, so we'll find that in Islamic Academy, Justice S.B. Sinha also used this, though he has given the conquering judgment, he has given this constitutional morality word in his judgment, Justice S.B. Sinha in 2003, in this particular case of Islamic Academy. So this is nothing new. Justice A.P. Shah in Naj Foundation has used his popular morality or constitutional morality. Justice A.P. Shah also used. So in India, when we are seeing the latest judgments of the Supreme Court, in that scenario, we find that constitutional morality is being used, and it has no, we can say, this definite or meaning like doctrine of basic structure. It is going to be another imposition of lex non scripta, which would be binding, because we see the fate of 99th Amendment through NJET, the primacy of the Chief Justice or this judicial independence. So in that basic structure, another addition of the constitutional morality is there. So because constitutional morality is a subject for which a complete class is required, and I'm not going into detail of that, but the only thing is that constitutional morality, the origin of which was relating to the government actions, that has now been applied for the judicial and other actions which are not related to the amendments to the constitution, but other types of the actions also. And in simple words, the judges are saying that this is nothing but the essence of the constitution. So what is that essence? Whether this essence is the same as it has been said in I.R. Coelho judgment, the two-stage test, the essence of the rights test and the rights test, or it is the test as in M. Nagaraj case, the court has said, the two stages test of to understand as to what is to be the law of the land for the purpose of, making constitutional some of the amendments relating to the reservation under Article 16 of the Constitution. So it depends entirely on the interpretation as to what the judges read into a particular topic, particular provision, particular article. That is all relating to, we can say, the particular lex non scripta, which they are trying to bring it in the constitutional interpretation. And as I initially told, through the case study method, as to how to decipher the ratio and the obiter. So this all is going to be the ratio under Article 141 of the Constitution, which the courts are doing under Article 142, that is doing complete justice. But whatever be there, we must not forget that constitutional law is not a finished product. It is a living law and it is dynamic. Hence, the issues and, we can say, the other type of the challenges are bound to come. But we have to thank for the belief that the Constitution works in various contradiction with balance. Today is the 26th June, and remind that 26th June of 1975, the day, the black day in the democratic history of the country, that India has come with this emergency in the name of internal disturbance, though it has been amended through 44th Amendment. But still India has come out from that emergency of 1975. So in today's scenario, when we are in the clutches or in the glitch of this COVID-19, whereby various rights of the common man are being infringed, and violated by the authorities, and the vulnerable groups are becoming more vulnerable. They are not able to get the food. There is a fight not only against their life and liberty, there is a fight against the hunger, there is a fight against the livelihood, there is a fight against the shelter also. In that situation, I perceive that the constitution is written in such a wonderful manner that it will protect us as it has protected us in 75 to 77, this emergency. So COVID is something different from that emergency, but it has created the situation for the common man where there are no two classes. Everyone is in the clutch of the COVID, be it the government, be it the governed, and that's why I hope and believe that the constitution will again come out to save and to protect the lives of the common man. This is what I would like to say to you. You also read yesterday's article of Dushyant Dave, senior advocate of Supreme Court. He has written in the newspaper, this Hindu, a very good article on the perils of these democratic values. We don't have any national plan so far for COVID-19. So every time one order or other order, these type of the things are coming up. So in that situation, if we see that one of the, we can say, observation of Einstein, that the strength of the constitution lies entirely in the determination of each citizen to defend it. So we as a citizen of the country, we can defend it, we can ask the government, because we have given the constitution to ourselves. Just remind the 5 initial words of the preamble, we the people of India, and the 5 last word of the preamble, and to give ourselves this constitution. So we have given the constitution to ourselves. What is there in between that? This is all ours, and this is the citizen of the India who can determine, who can defend us, who can defend the constitution, constitutionalism, constitutional conventions, at the same time can come out from this situation of COVID-19. So with these words, I uh, I thank you for all the patient listening and learning all these things. I don't know how much I be able to tell you the things, because constitution is a subject which can never be limited in 2 hours, 3 hours, or 4 hours lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you so